Good evening, and welcome to the Iowa blog. I'm your host, Craig Wynn. In this evening's program, we're going to return to the second Mizmowr. Mizmowr means lyrics to be sung in Hebrew. They were written mostly by Dowd, who's better known as David, and they are chronicled as psalms. Now, the second Mizmowr begins by conveying the following. It asks this question: for what reason? It's from La Ma. Why? Toward what end? And what is the purpose? One should ask. Do noisy and confused throngs of scheming and rebellious Gentiles gather together to conspire in open defiance? This is from Raga Goyim. Do boisterous and disorderly crowds of restless religious, political, and militant ethnicities and countries, estranged from Israel, rise up vehemently and hastily to agitate with one another, with races attempting to be noticed and to gain attention through their perceived and contrived plots, erupting like an open wound, swirling around and churning things up for the moment, creating a disturbing and tumultuous commotion as part of an unrestrained cult of worshipers for a time by hurriedly conceiving and promoting clandestine conspiracies. Boy, that sounds like it was written for today, and it's what we're witnessing throughout the world as Muslims conspire to overthrow governments and impose their will. The people of these nations who are transformed while massing under an antiquated and unifying religious, political, and conspiratorial leader, Wa Leom. These groups who associate and gather together under an individual who changes them as a result of a primitive and arcane concept. They choose to plot and to speak Haggah. They're driven away by their choices and utterances, having wrongly decided after selectively searching, muttering among their musings, aloud among their imagined grievances and intrapersonal beliefs, all formed after considerable attention to selective information, to scheme to remove the people who are the focus of their complaint. Called imperfect Jusive, which means continually and literally doing so on their own initiative and in vain, deluded in their fantasies, rock, by promoting their unreal claims and their worthless myths for absolutely no reason. Having drawn their weapons as paid warriors without benefit, without an actual reason or cause, while revealing their unfurling and empty lives, unfulfilling and empty lives, and dissatisfaction with their situation. These uninhibited scoundrels brandish idle plans, puffery and dreams, and attack to their disadvantage. Mizmowr, lyrics to be sung, Psalm 2:1. Wow. This is obviously prophetic of our day, when conspiracies, especially those which inappropriately impugn Jews, are so prolific that they are woven into the very fabric of the human psyche. When, of course, the opposite of true, and it becomes widely accepted, these lies. And we find God asking his creation, why are they promoting such stupid notions? What is the end game? What do they want to achieve? What's the purpose? What is to be gained by this raggish goyim, this noisy and confused throngs of unrestrained and scheming, rebellious Gentiles conspiring together in open defiance, such that there is a cult and that they have become wholly unreceptive to the truth. Boy, this sure sounds like the union of progressives today and Muslims as they seek to demean, demonize, and destroy Israel, all on behalf of a cult of Satan worshipers, a cult devoted to death, a cult that glorifies rape and terrorism, even lying. Well, they have become, according to this testimony, akin to zombies, and that, like the mindless walking dead, they have nothing to live for except to prey upon those who they have not yet inflicted. That's why I love the Mizmowr, because Dowd was not only an expert in the Torah, he was not only the man who was closest to God, who knew God better than anyone else on the planet. He was not only the most brilliant thinker and the most articulate writer, but he was also a prophet, which means he was taken to our present and our future to witness it and report back to us. Well, late in volume 2 of another of the books that I have written, it was called Observations, we searched out and we found the meaning of leom, which was deployed perfectly in this context to depict the lives of the conspirators and the religious founders, those lives that have been transformed, albeit for the worse, by them. Think of the fact that there are 2 billion people on this planet whose lives have been changed for the worse by Muhammad and his Quran and by Allah, turning what may otherwise have been decent people into the monsters that Muslims have become today. This term leom speaks of being transformed by the antiquated political, religious, and racist propaganda of a leader. It reflects their inclination to participate in this group, reinforcing the primitive myths that they have been perpetrating and promoting. God himself refers to conspiracy as rebellion. He acknowledges that conspiracy is comprised of delusional fantasies which are worthless. And yet, this counterproductive enterprise will become so popular, it has become so popular, both politically with progressives and religiously with Muslims, and to a large degree that Christianity is also a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy of counterfeiting Dowd, the author of this psalm, and transforming him into the myth of Jesus Christ. So for those who claim to be covenant, while at the same time claiming conspiracies are true, be aware that according to God, they would be wrong on both accounts. Conspiracy is just another form of religion, another poisonous political perspective. There is no reason whatsoever to believe any of them, and an overwhelming reason to refrain from promoting them. And clearly, conspiracy is the essence of the 3 religions that are plaguing Israel and the world today. Christianity was conceived entirely on what I call replacement foolology. This conspiracy to corrupt the word of God, to misquote it, to misrepresent the word of God, to create this false notion of a counterfeit of Dowd. It really is nothing more than that. And they get everything wrong and twisted, upside down and inverted as a result. And Judaism was conceived to oppose the growing popularity of Christianity, of this lie. And it only emerged when Rabbi Akiva foisted his false Messiah, that of Bar Kokhba, on the people. And one conspiracy simply replaced another. And look how badly that turned out for the Jewish people, because Rabbi Akiva's false Messiah caused the Romans to return in a vicious way, ultimately creating the diaspora, which led to the Holocaust. And Christianity in Rome could have been nipped in the bud if those who were students of the Torah back in the 1st and 2nd centuries simply recognized the many hundreds of prophecies that very clearly state that Dowd, who is known as David, the king of Israel, the Messiah and the Son of God, would return to fulfill Pesach Matzah B'Kodim. Islam, of course, is the greatest conspiracy of all. It was founded by a horrible individual, a man who falsely claimed to speak for God and yet was a rapist, a pedophile, a mass murdering terrorist. He was amongst the worst people who ever lived. He claimed that his Quran was revealed to him by Allah, when in fact most of the Quran is bastardized accounts that he purchased from rabbis in Yathrib as they recited their Talmud. And what didn't come from the Talmud came from Hanif. Hanif were Arab converts to Judaism in Yemen. And he cited their literature as well to create the impression that he was literate. That's the conspiracy of the Quran. And of course, Islam has grown to become a death cult. Conspiracies and conspiratorial plots that fester in the hearts and minds of men give expression to the deceit and death that we are witnessing today. This word leom is used both in Yeshaya, Isaiah 16:7, and Yirmiyah, Jeremiah 59:1, to express the imagined grievances and ultra-personal beliefs associated with the judgment of the modern manifestations of Moab. Moab means, who's your father? Who gave birth to you? Muslims, rabbinic Jews, particularly the Haredim, Christians, believing that Paul and Peter spoke for God, and that is impossible. Who's your father? Modern Moab, resulting in the decision to drive them out of the land before exterminating them. Earlier in Yeshaya 8:19, Haggai is associated with the conspiratorial musings of those in concert with the adversary. But it is also has a positive side, as many Hebrew words do, with Yahweh using it to encourage his people to ponder the proper response so as to communicate intelligently. Here, Haggai is used to say that the proponents of conspiracies are wrong. God is revealing that the conspiratorialists have driven away a massive number of people from the truth. And as a result of their imagined grievances and ultra-personal beliefs, they are estranged from God himself. He even affirms that anyone seeking to debunk these myths quickly discovers that those prone to believe conspiracies are victims of selective information, meaning that they only consider sources, no matter how dubious, that reinforce their faith. I've written 5 volumes to disprove Christianity, another 5 to disprove Islam, 3 to disprove Judaism. All of my claims are accurate against this faith. And yet, rather than consider the evidence that is marshaled against them, all that the faithful will do is wallow in the sayings of those who repeat the same lies. It's all selective information. When the facts don't align with the faith, the faithful don't care. Now, also telling, Haga suggests that the actual purpose of these conspiracies and the religions born of them is to remove and expel the people who are the focus of their complaint. Palestine will be free. Does that ring a bell? God is thereby impugning the purpose of the mother of conspiracies. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is an example of this. So is the Quran, but very much so. So is the Christian New Testament, where Jews are replaced by the Christian church, where all the promises made to Israel are magically changed to the Gentiles, and they claim everything that God gave to his people. Now, rock is the final word of this prophetic announcement, and it's used in two of the Mashal Proverbs, both 12:11 and 28:19. And there, the message is, he who tills the land shall be satisfied with bread, but he who follows the vain is void of understanding and will never be satisfied. Rock is from Ruk, which speaks of being emptied out and unfulfilled, never satisfied, malnourished, impoverished. Rock is also found in Yeshaya, Isaiah 29:8, where it conveys, it shall come to be as when a hungry man dreams, and behold, he eats, but when he is awakened, his soul is empty and unsatisfied. So shall the multitudes of the Gentiles be, and their nations, when they fight against Mount Zion and against the signs posted along the way, when they fight in their condemnation against Zionism. Modern research into the growth of conspiracies has found that those who have conspiratorial notions are unsatisfied with their life. They live empty and unfulfilling lives, even an impoverished existence. And the lone common denominator among those who believe and advocate conspiracies, whether they be religious or political or just anti-Semitic, is that they're looking for someone to blame other than themselves for their miserable lives. It is like the Muslims who perpetrate heinous acts on Jews and then play the victim card, wanting to blame somebody else for their misery. It's wonderful when God reveals something in our distant past, this time 3,000 years before scientists would affirm it. But let's be clear. Since Yahweh has been so with us, with the use of Rak, we know that conspiracies are comprised of puffery and of dreams and that clearly advocating all manner of conspiracies, whether through religion or politics, is counterproductive. Without exception, every conspiracy, again, religion and political conspiracies, man has invented and popularized, they're all wrong. Once upon a time, I had thought there may have been a few that had some merit, only to learn that the alleged perpetrators were overly credited and that there wasn't one person in charge over the years to perpetuate the plan, but just an entire interwoven web that one gets tangled up in if you try to explain them. I also discovered that making the case for the conception and the continuance of clandestine conspiracies was far too convoluted to warrant the effort. It's much easier just to say they're wrong and move on to things that matter. These theories require their advocates to be highly selective in the information they consider, while disregarding all evidence to the contrary. And in the end, what does one achieve other than to say that men have a tendency to be conniving and controlling, deceitful? and destructive. Now, it's one thing to look at Adam Weishaupt, for example, and the Order of the Illuminati, along with Freemasonry, and his plan to undermine the influence of the Roman Catholic Church as they held sway over European governments, and conclude that his ideas played a role in the French and American revolutions, because that's true, they did. But to claim that a small clandestine group, by whatever name, pulls the levers which control the world, and have done so continuously for the past 250 years under the auspices of the Rothschilds, the Illuminati, Freemasonry, the Round Table, Skull and Bones, Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers, the Bohemian Grove crowd, and the New World Order is simply ridiculous. The fact is, the mythology responsible for almost all of this is Christianity, and Christian fascination with the arrival of their Antichrist. Little they know, he's already been here. And he is responsible for the books written by Luke, including Acts, and the 14 other New Testament epistles. Let's consider the underlying text for this particular fascination, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Second only to Paul's epistles and the book of Acts, it is the most notorious, widely distributed, and universally destructive anti-Semite and conspiratorial text of all time. It was pure babble, plagiarized by Christians in Russia in 1903. Out of two well-known books, neither of which ever mentioned Jews. It was initially satirized in the Russian newspaper Znamya, the Banner, and then published 2 years later in an appendix to the Great in the Small, the Coming of the Antichrist and the Rule of Satan on Earth, by the Christian author Sergei Nilus. Its purpose was to spread Christian mass hatred of Jews by claiming that it provided actual documentation of the minutes taken to memorialize 24 meetings between Jewish rabbis, recording their secret plans as a race to rule the world by manipulating the economy, controlling the media, subverting the morals of Gentiles, and fostering religious conflict. This commingling and twisting of books, detailing European political and religious intrigue, was originally thought to be nothing more than a parody conceived by changing the words to a popular song, such that the new lyrics degraded Jews during the time that vicious anti-Semitic pogroms and the Russian Empire were flourishing, when countless Jews died or were exiled. In fact, many of the same anti-Semites responsible for the mass abuse of Jews during the pogroms played a role in the hoax of the protocols to justify their actions. For this reason, Pavel Krishevin, the book's initial publisher, deliberately obscured the origins of the text Sergei Nilus had composed to make the lies appear credible. But nonetheless, he left a wide trail of contradictions, each sufficient to properly assess credit and blame. Just prior to this time, following the partitions of Poland, the Russian Empire inherited the world's largest Jewish population. In the shuttles in which they lived, these Jewish refugees stayed to themselves, governed themselves, and took care of themselves. And while they willingly paid their taxes, acknowledged the authority of the Tsar, and served in the Imperial Russian Army, they had the misfortune of arriving in Russia when the ruling class became more hardline in its reactionary policies, promoting the ideas of Christian orthodoxy, Tsarist uh, autocraticism, and Russian nationality. The Jews who had attempted to assimilate were regarded with suspicion as infiltrators trying to overtake society. Well, Jews who remained true to their culture and resented such things were seen as undesirable aliens. And it was out of this xenophobic, anti-immigrant, anti-political, and anti-religious milieu that the protocols were written by those who falsely projected their flawed character on those they despised, on those they wanted to blame for their miserable lives. Those who actually engaged in racial genocide justified their bloodlust by blaming those they were killing of secretly wanting to be just like them. It is stunning in a way. The Jewish people who were blamed for trying to control the world had no country to call their own. They had just been pushed out of Poland only to enter Russia, where they were terrorized. In a matter of decades, they would be gassed and incinerated by the millions in concentration camps throughout Poland and Germany. The impoverished were mistreated by those who sought to rule the world politically and religiously, such that their race, Russian or German, Arab or Japanese, Italian or Spanish, would reign supreme. And therein lies the revolting heart of all conspiratorialists. Those who promote them are guilty of the crimes they falsely project on others, and mostly on Jews. This is not to say that Jews were entirely innocent. One Jew in particular went out of his way to harm his people, serving as a modern-day Paul. The idea of an international Jewish conspiracy for world domination was actually minted 60 years early by Jacob Rothman, a Russian Jew from Minsk. He claimed to have had a falling out with agents from the local Kahal, the autonomous governing group of Ashkenazi Jews, even though it had been abolished 20 years earlier. So much for truth. After converting to the Russian Orthodox Church, he authored polemics against the Talmud and the extinct now Kahals, falsely claiming that they not only continued to exist, but they met in secret to undermine Christian entrepreneurs such that they would confiscate their property and seize their power. He would write the local and universal Jewish Brotherhood and the book of the Kahal, while mostly a projection of his new Russian orthodoxy. Rothman's fanciful conspiracy of international Jewish shadow governments was used to justify the pogroms. A self-loathing Jew. During this same period, a British subject of Dutch Jewish ethnicity wrote The Conquest of the World by Jews. His troubled soul served in the Ottoman army and converted to Islam, the two religions that would do their utmost to demonize Jews. As with both of these men, as was the case with the Russians and the Prussians, behind the protocols, it was all about scapegoating, about blaming someone other than themselves for their problems. The Russians blamed Jews for losing the Russo-Japanese War and the 1905 revolution, just as Germans blamed Jews for losing the First World War. And then after the Tsarists lost the 1917 Russian Revolution, Jews were once again blamed, with the protocols becoming a political weapon wielded by conservatives the world over against liberals. The Bolshevik communists were falsely depicted as overwhelmingly Jewish, executing the plan presented in the protocols. Paradoxically, the early Russian edition of the protocol specifically acknowledges that they did not come from a Zionist organization, the absolute opposite of what the conspiracy later claimed. Later editions would state that the document, which was never produced, was stolen from a Jewish organization, and yet a living contradiction. It was written in the first person plural, as if the plotters were talking and telling their own story in their own words. But even then, the protocols are awash in generalizations and platitudes and completely devoid of specifics, lacking anything a rational person could use to fact check the story. Following the Russian Revolution in 1917 and this purported Jewish conspiracy to dominate the world was brought to the West by anti-Bolshevik, anti-communist Christians and circulated across Europe, the United States, South America, Japan, and of course, the Islamic Middle East. It was immediately popularized in America by the automaker Henry Ford, who in the 1920s published a series of articles based upon the protocols in his Detroit newspaper, the Dearborn Independent. And then he paid for, printed, and distributed 500,000 copies under the title, The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem. Not surprising, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels, who claimed that the protocols were factual, were lavish in their praise of Henry Ford. But the paradigm of capitalism did not work alone. It had help slandering Jews in the form of Father Coughlin. He was a Roman Catholic priest who was the first to use radio to reach a mass audience. He was a televangelist, well, I guess before television. He routinely entertained his 30 million listeners with his pro-fascist and anti-Semitic rhetoric that called for the nationalization of all major industries and the end of democracy and capitalism. It sounds like Pope Francis. He also called for the abolition of political parties and elections. He went from being one of FDR's most outspoken advocates, telling a congressional hearing, God is directing President Roosevelt, not true, to being one of his critics over monetary policy, advocating that nationalism of the Federal Reserve was needed. The Roman Catholics' political advocacy organization, Social Justice, published weekly installments of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. That is your Roman Catholic Church's influence in America, just as Pope Pius XII would serve as Hitler's Pope. A year after Henry Ford's publications in America in 1921, the London Times presented conclusive proof that the Protocols was nothing more than clumsy plagiarism. Too bad they haven't done the same research on the Quran. Then Dulles, who was in Constantinople developing relationships with the post-Ottoman Turks, actually reported the source from which it was plagiarized to the Times, and would later, without success, lobby the U.S. State Department to publicly denounce the forgery. They confirmed that it had been copied indirectly from a French political satire that never mentioned Jews. It's Dialogue in Hell between Machiavelli and Montesquieu, written by Maurice Joly, a French attorney in 1868. That in itself is interesting because Machiavelli wrote The Prince. to increase the political and religious authority of the Roman Catholic Church and to consecrate absolute power under a single individual, the Pope. He encouraged popes to be ruthless tyrants, totally merciless, because the fear of terrorist tactics would cause people to submit to their authority. According to Machiavelli, the results justify the means to achieve them. The sole intent of the prince was to establish Roman Catholic domination over the earth, not Jewish influence. Further, Montesquieu's position was just the opposite. He was a French philosopher who popularized the idea of separating government authority so that it was not concentrated under a single individual. The United States Constitution was influenced by his philosophy, as it gave rise to shared powers of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. Therefore, the fictitious religious political satire from which Protocols of the Elders of Zion was plagiarized was actually written to protest the regime of Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, who ruled France from 1848 through 1870. The ghost of Montesquieu made the case for freedom, while the ghost of Machiavelli opined for tyrants. The spirit of Machiavelli would claim he wouldn't even need 20 years to utterly transform most of Europe and the character of Europe, to render it as docile under tyranny as the debased people of Asia, addressing the Islamic kingdoms of the Middle East. But Montesquieu insisted that the people's desire for freedom was invincible. Over the course of 25 dialogues, step by step, Machiavelli, who in Joly's plot covertly represented Napoleon, explains how he would replace freedom with deposition. In any given European country, he states, absolute power will no longer be an accident of fortune, but will become of need of the modern society, recognizing that Machiavelli would prevail on behalf of an unified and draconian church and state, with the Roman Catholic Church domineering the world. The secular Montesquieu laments, in the end, eternal God, what have you permitted? Joly, for having exposed the menace of church and state, was arrested and jailed for 18 months and put in prison in Paris for his book, and he was banned. The protocols 1 through 19 closely follow the order of Maurice Joly's dialogues 1 through 17, with identifiable phrases from Joly's peppering the anti-Semitic farce. And as an interesting aside, Joly, a monarchist and legitimist, a proponent of royalty and dynastic succession, actually plagiarized much of his dialogue in hell from a novel by Eugene Sue, Les Mysteries du People. The initial transformation into an anti-Semitic text was accomplished in the Prussian novel by Hermann Goethe called Beitrag to Sedan, which was published in 1868. Goethe, an anti-Semite, postal worker as well, was an agent of and provocateur for the Russian secret police. In 1849, he had been convicted of forging letters which were used as evidence to frame Democratic leaders. Losing his job at the post office, Goethe began working as a conservative columnist for the Neuen publication in Zittenberg, a newspaper, along with other notables who partnered with him, such as Otto von Bismarck. Soon thereafter, traveling to Turkey before the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. His leisure time was consumed writing romance novels with a political bent under the pen name Sir John Ratcliffe, typically attacking either Jews or the British government. In 1968, Groditch plagiarized and bastardized Dialogue in Hell between Machiavelli and Montesquieu by replacing Machiavelli's Roman Catholic conspiratorial despot debating a secular liberation and libertarism with the fictional Elders of Zion. Beyond substituting names, he added the chapter at the Jewish cemetery in Prague, wherein a secret rabbinical cabal, the council of the representatives of the 12 tribes of Israel, unaware of the fact that all but 2 of the tribes remained lost after the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom, conducted one of their centennial meetings at midnight in the cemetery, in which the devil was said to have played a starring role. This work of complete fiction alleges to report on the progress of long-term rabbinical conspiracy to reestablish world domination. Well, the Jews have never dominated the world. They've never actually controlled anything more than the tiny, tiny nation of Israel, and even then, it for a very short period of time. In addition to the Machiavellian schemes, Groditch added the acquisition of property, transforming craftsmen into industrial workers, infiltration into high public offices, and control of the press, such that, according to Chairman Levitt, rabbis would become kings of the world in 100 years. The fictional rabbinical speech was frequently quoted as if it were authentic and cited as proof of the authenticity of the protocols of the Elders of Zion. But even here, like Satan himself, Groditch borrowed heavily from a scene in the French portrayal of the life of the Count Cagliostro, whose alias, Giuseppe Balsamo, became the title of a book by Alexandre Dumas. This rather infamous Italian, who died in 1975, was an occultist. He was a psychic, he was an alchemist, a pretend healer, and a magician. Count Cagliostro, aka Giuseppe Balsamo, became one of several central players in the days leading to the French Revolution as a result of his role in the plot of the affair of the diamond necklace. Yes, all of this is interwoven. Well, that's the book about why the diamond necklace precedes the French Revolution, and Marie Antoinette, and false accusations that were leveled against her. And so the most famous chapter of the protocols was pilfered from that story. At the Jewish cemetery in Prague, that actual event appeared in St. Petersburg in a pamphlet format long before the Elders of the Protocols of Zion was published, or the Protocols of the Elders of Zion was published. It was purported to be nonfiction and celebrated as truly and frighteningly accurate at the same time. That conspiracy was so intriguing and well known, it is wonder that anyone believed the protocols of the Elders of Zion. Well, one con artist simply followed another, And while it is likely that the man who claimed to have been abandoned after being born to Christians of nobility, who traveled to Medina and Mecca and Cairo prior to being admitted into the Roman Catholic Sovereign Military Order of Malta, played only a minor role in the affair. The story chronicled in the book Christians plagiarized to credit the concluding chapter of the Protocols demonstrates the lure of conspiracy and its appeal. The diamond necklace story, as I have mentioned, is really an affair that was wrongly attributed to Queen Marie Antoinette, the wife of King Louis XVI of France. She turned it down, saying, we have more need, she said, for 70 ships than of necklaces. Both the truth, however, did not stand in the way of fictional tales that were promoted by the Jacobins to discredit the Queen. They wanted a revolution, and lies are typically the basis of such things. While it was not true, pamphlets flooded the French countryside, attesting to the notion that Antoinette had attempted to defraud the crown jewelers, all of which was used to justify her beheading and the French Revolution. In reality, because the crown jewelers couldn't get the Queen to buy their necklace, they elicited the help of trickster Jeanne de Saint-Remy Valois, who conceived the plan to use the necklace to gain royal patronage and thus wealth and power in the Roman Catholic Church in France. After becoming the mistress of Cardinal de Rohan, whom Marie Antoinette despised for being a rumor monger who would spread lies about her to the Holy Roman Empress Maria Theresa, Jeanne de Saint-Remy played the cardinal who became convicted as a result of letters that she forged that Marie Antoinette was secretly in love with him. I don't know what's worse. The Muslims, the Roman Catholic Church, the anti-Semitic French, the anti-Semitic Russians, the Jacobins who plotted the French Revolution. It's just a sea of scum. Anyway, to fool the cardinal into believing that she and the Queen were close, Saint Remy Valois in August of 1784 arranged for the Cardinal de Rohan to meet the Queen in the Garden Palace of Versailles. But unbeknownst to Rohan, rather than being greeted by Antoinette, Saint Remy arranged for the Cardinal to meet with a prostitute, Nicole de Oliva, who was chosen for the role because of her resemblance to Antoinette. After Jeanne de Saint-Remy entered the French royal court through another lover, Villette, she continued to manipulate Cardinal Rohan, and she transferred large sums of money under the guise of supporting the Queen's charity work while she perpetuated the myth of her close ties with Antoinette. She became so brazen with her forgeries, many including the jewelers of Beaumer and Bessinge. They ended up embracing her deceptions as real, resolving to use her to sell their necklace, offering her a commission. A talented con artist and forger, the French trickster Jeanne Saint-Remy Valois, pretending to be Queen Marie Antoinette, sent several letters to Cardinal de Rohan, which included an order to buy the necklace, even signing each letter Marie Antoinette of France. But since there was starvation and poverty in France, Saint Remy asked the cardinal to act as a secret intermediary. So he negotiated a price to be paid in installments, claiming to have the Queen's authorization, showing the jewelers the documents that had been forged for this event. Well, all of this was then used by the Jacobins to discredit Marie Antoinette, and that eventually led to the French Revolution. And it was all tied into this story that became the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The whole story reeks. It is about human politics and duplicity and religion. And there was no religion immune to this scheme, no political aspirant in Europe who was immune either. The worst part of the protocols that allowed anti-Semites to spread their hatred of Jews worldwide. It became a blueprint for one of the most absurd conspiracies after another. Even when it was shown to be untrue, Jews are now seen as controlling every significant human endeavor. Today, the most commonly read rendition of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion was anonymously augmented in 1934 to include articles from Ford's Dearborn Independent, thereby expanding the original. In the company of the Antichrist and the rule of Satan on earth is where they derived much of their material. Henry Ford was also a horrible human being, and they all contributed to anti-Semitism. Yahweh recognizes that anyone who dares step into the murky realm of clandestine schemes gets filthy and is stained by the experience. Even if they manage to escape, no one gets out unscathed. It is a muddy and murky world with few facts and tenuous speculations. It is not a place for those who wish to be known based upon evidence and reason. So we have just begun. And now it's time to turn the page and read more of what Dowd wrote prophetically to us in his second Mizmowr. We'll turn to that in our next program. But recognize for now that in the first statement of the second Mizmowr, we are seeing ourselves. We're seeing the world as it is, upside down in hostile religions and hostile conspiracies, with people rising up around the world, both as progressives and as Christians, and mostly as Muslims, to demean and to degrade Jews, to blame them for things that those who are casting the aspersions are actually guilty of doing. They spoke of what we are witnessing, and that is the magic and the beauty of prophecy. It not only tells us what we are to expect, it not only prepares us for the future, it not only explains why things are happening the way they are, it proves that the text was authored by someone who had access to our future and our past and documented all of this for our benefit. We will continue with the second Mizmowr in our next program. I am Craig Wynn, and this has been the Yahweh Blog.